Well, hey, thanks for joining me today. I am with a very special guest today. And actually, today we're going to do something a little bit different. Usually I interview guests, but we're going to turn it around. With me is tax attorney Larry Heinkel, who is really one of the godfathers of tax resolution. I met Larry 2010 at a tax conference, and I was really, really impressed with his strategies and and actually his optimism, especially when you're dealing with people with higher end people who have tax resolution issues. They have assets to protect. They have higher income. These are the harder cases to deal with. And, Larry's just one of the top experts in the countries, and I've enjoyed his friendship over the years. Now, one of the things I do that Larry doesn't do is I do a lot of international tax resolution, and I really, really do enjoy doing it. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to hand this over to Larry, and he's going to interview me as the international tax resolution expert. So Larry, thank you so much for your generosity of this today. Thanks for joining me today. How's it going? You ready to interview me?
I am ready, Anthony. How are you doing up there in the cold?
Yeah, the cold. Yeah. We got a few more days of it. I'm not so happy about it. So hopefully I'll be down there, and I might visit you soon down in Tampa. I hope to do that. Hope to get down to see you soon.
Good. Well, yeah. So Anthony, you're right. I don't personally do a lot of international work, and I know you do, and it's been a pleasure knowing you from way back when we first met in Baltimore, and I will give you accolades as well, because you were, when you go to these conferences and you talk to people during the break, you quickly learn that a lot of people are either newbies or they just don't get it or whatever. And talking with you, and then there was another young lady that worked with you at the time.
Yep.
And, you guys knew what you were talking about. And so it's a lot more fun hanging out with those kind of people. So tell me how you got into the international arena. Let's start with that.
All right. Well, I was actually at a tax conference, Larry. And I got a call. I was at a tax conference in Vail, Colorado. And during a break, I went out, and there was a voicemail from my firm. This is when you used to leave voicemails.
Yeah.
And I listened to it. Hey, we have a client with a $7 million unreported account in Switzerland. Is this something we handle? I go, of course we do. Yeah. Of course we do. I don't know what it is, but this sounds like a pretty good case. And and before I got into tax, I did a lot of criminal law, and I was pretty successful at it. The only problem is it's not really all that fulfilling when you get someone off the hook on a crime they did, and then the next day they're picked up for something else. And so there's a futility involved. And a lot of criminal prosecution. So I was good at it, understood it, enjoyed it to a degree, but it's just not an ideal situation for me. I was trying to grow a firm, and when you're doing criminal law, they're going to do it again, but they're really not the kind of client you want to have again. So, what I found through tax, and this is sort of thing. So I was like, okay, well, what's this all about? I don't know anything about, and I didn't know anything about, anything about it, but I said, yeah, schedule a call with them. Whatever it is, who knows who knows? I have no idea. I'm definitely willing to talk to him about it. And so he, explained to me what was going on, his situation. And then he says, well, the IRS has this voluntary disclosure program about people like me, and I'm wondering if I should do it. And so really he and I together, we were, as he was in there, I was like, okay, I'll be honest with you. I've never heard of an FBAR before.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was very upfront with him, like, look, I don't know anything about this, but I'm really interested in trying to see to help you out. And so he goes, great. And then, he's like, all right, I'm going to hire you. I was like, really? Okay. All right. I told you the truth. I don't know anything about this, but I'm definitely willing to go through. And so then, we became we became pretty friendly as we went through it. And I went through the program, and I was learning about the FBAR. I was like, oh, this is what's happening. Oh my God, this is what's happening. And then, so later on, a few months later, I go, hey, by the way, why did you hire me? And he goes, oh, because nobody knows who you are. It's like, okay. And he was like, because he had law firms, he didn't want to go to his normal law firm to say, hey, I've been,
people to know. Yeah. Anthony, I've often said that what we do for a living is kind of like being an infectious disease doctor. Nobody wants their neighbors to know that we represent them. Just
Yeah.
like you don't want to, if you pull up into an infectious disease doctor's parking lot, you want to obscure your license tag, uh, because nobody wants anyone to know
Nobody.
that you do it. So that's really interesting. Well, I tell you what, for our audience that might not have a lot of in-depth knowledge about tax law, give us a brief overview of what's the definition or what's the difference between being a U.S. citizen or resident on how we are taxed, because we're taxed on worldwide income, right?
Yeah.
But somebody from Italy or Germany or Australia, are they taxed on worldwide income? Touch on that, if you will, Anthony. Give us a little background about that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because this is the critical distinction between the United States and really every other country in the world. Now, some people will say, well, the small nation of Eritrea in Africa does the same thing. They really don't. On paper, they do, but what they do, what's different in the United States of America than any other country in the world, is that we tax people on citizenship, and we'll say worldwide jurisdiction, but it's actually not even that. It's actually universal tax jurisdiction. That is, if you make any money anywhere in the universe and you are a U.S. person, you are subject to U.S. taxation. So really, if you did sort of open up, a titanium mine on the moon or something like that, the IRS would be taxing you on that.
Neil Armstrong had to report the income he earned for those days in space and on the moon.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, just escaping the territory doesn't get rid of it, and that's really the distinction. And why the difference? Why is the United States of America this way? And this is what we've covered. On our weekly podcast I do with my good friends John Richardson and Keith Redmond on a recurring basis. We go over the abuses of this, and over the years of being inside of this, I have become so incredibly radicalized by what this is actually about, because there's so many different things happening. And one of the things is that, oddly, the biggest victim of the US's global taxation on its citizens, universal taxation, is actually the IRS. Because what happens is these rules get so unbearably complicated, because every country has a different thing. Some countries have a treaty, some countries don't have a treaty. Sometimes a treaty overrules the protocol, or there's protocols that overrule the treaty. So there is endless work to do with international taxation, because the tax code is trying to take things that don't fit in to a U.S. equivalent, and they're trying to cram them into something. And it's really not, and this is sort of the irony. For most people, they don't pay a lot of U.S. income taxes. Their issue isn't, and this is one of the things, oddly, for international tax resolution, the tax bill actually isn't the main problem, because oftentimes there's a foreign tax credit or a foreign earned income exclusion that will lower the tax. What the problem is, what the actual true problem is complying with these ridiculous forms that oftentimes there's not guidance on. Oftentimes there's conflicting guidance, and oftentimes the IRS itself is intentionally opaque. And really one of the issues that right now, which does crack me up in a way, because I think I was someone who might have started this mythology way back when, is that this first client of mine, my first offshore client, he was invested in, he had a brokerage account held by UBS. And in this brokerage account, there was a broker who was buying and selling, I don't know why, mutual funds. Didn't really make sense to me. I'm like, look at this portfolio. He's like, well, why don't you just invest in the stocks? Why are you buying and trading in mutual funds? Okay, this is terrible. And then I realized this accounting is just brutally awful. We submitted his disclosure and we did our best trying to calculate what things were. Then it was it was an IRS examiner in New Haven who reached out to me and said, hey, look, I've been assigned this case. And honestly, she was really brilliant. She was really brilliant as we were going, I worked through this with her. And then she said something to me, Anthony, goes, you know what these are? I go, what's that? She said, these are PFICs, passive foreign investment companies. I'm like, okay. She goes, and our problem with the IRS is we don't know what to do with these because it's so complicated. So for the voluntary disclosure, the IRS kind of made some adjusted rules for this. Now, what I did is I went off to tell people, hey, you got to really watch out for PFIX. You got to watch out for PFIX. But what happened is there's been a miscommunication where people believe that every foreign mutual fund is a PFIC. Yeah, and the distinction in the case that I had was there was somebody trading and being a broker. That's the thing that created the PFIC. The foreign mutual fund alone, and this is what's funny, if you ask any tax professional, it's like, oh yeah, that's a PFIC, that's a PFIC. But if you go to the actual instructions for the form, there's nothing to indicate a foreign mutual fund on its own is actually a passive foreign investment company, nor has the IRS ever said it. The only time they did was there was one letter where they said, yeah, if you are trading it, it's a PFIC. But alone, it's not. But we're dealing with so much. That's just one example. It's like, well, what do you mean that? What do you do
there? Because you're getting you're getting into the weeds, but
yeah, a little bit.
You know what you're talking about.
Yeah, a little bit.
You clearly are an expert. But for the audience, let me ask you this. So when you're a U.S. resident or citizen, and most of us, listening are going to be citizens. So if I go over to France for a year, take a sabbatical, and I work there, so I've got to still, because a lot of people I think would think, well, I'm in France, I don't have anything to do with the United States. No, you're still a citizen. Yeah. I still need to file my 1040 and report that. But do I get any credit for the fact that I'm also probably subject to tax in France as well, since I'm working?
Well, France is a perfect example. I'm glad you asked that, and I'm glad you asked it. So, and we have a comment that I think will really help out illustrate it. But France is a terrific example of the futility of forcing people to file reports because France has high taxes. There's a high tax rate in France. So if someone's working in France, they're going to get, they're going to get credit for the taxes they paid. The IRS may fight you on some of the taxes because the IRS will claim that some of the Social Security payments you're making don't really count, and there's been litigation on that. I won't get into that, but that's getting into the weeds a little bit.
You're saying we get credit for what we pay to France.
You will get credit what you pay in France, and so the truth is, all of these people, have to spend exorbitant amount of money. And this is really the problem, exorbitant amount of money on compliance just to prove to the U.S. government they don't owe any money. And so then the IRS has all this work to do just for people who don't owe any money. Now, so your follow-up question is like, well, why don't you just not file? Well, the answer is this, because oftentimes, if you have a simple case, you don't have any assets, not a lot of income overseas, if you don't file, it's not going to be a big deal. It's just not. What happens if you don't file and you have a bank account worth over $10,000? If you have a corporation or just a business you own, just say, hey, I'm a plumber in France. If you have a pension, these are the things that there will trigger reporting requirements. And if you don't report those, the fines are out of control. And really the problem that you have is that, and I'm sure you're seeing this, the IRS audit rate has gone way, 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 way down. And one of the reasons why is that audits are hard. Tax audits are hard. You have to kind of figure it out. So what the IRS actually prefers to do in their audits is not necessarily audit on tax. That's boring. And it's not going to result in a lot of money. What they want to do is audit you, and really not audit you, just say, hey, look, you were required to file this form. You didn't file it. Therefore, here's hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties. To give you an example, on the FBAR report, if you don't report a foreign bank account, the IRS can hit you with an up to 50% penalty of the account value. The account can make zero money. The account could lose money. The account could have zero tax consequences.
It's
the IRS
based penalty.
What's that? Yeah,
it's an asset-based. Yeah, hold on.
It's
Hold on an FBAR a minute. I want to start, a little basic. So if I go and I'm just me, a lawyer, and I go to France and I teach for a year, I'm going to have to report that I'm to France. They're going to tax me. I report to the IRS, and they're going to figure out what my tax is, but they're going to give me a credit. And I'm being loosely speaking. They're going to give me a credit for what I paid to France, and that's all well and good. But the guy from France, a Frenchman, not a U.S. citizen. Now, if he comes here and lives my understanding is 183 days. Now he's a resident. He's going to be subject to U.S. taxes on all his other income that he has. He's got all kinds of stuff going on in France, and he's on the board of this, and he makes a lot of money. But it just came over here, and maybe he's not even working. Maybe he just rented a nice beachfront condo in Miami Beach for 7 months. He's going to get ensnared in the U.S. tax system.
Larry, thank you so much, because this is often the more serious problem. Because if someone's overseas, that's sort of a harder case for the IRS to work. But the problem, and really the people that we've represented a ton of, are H-1B visa holder, green card holders, investor visas, because they come in and this is the problem. Their immigration attorney tells them nothing of the U.S. tax code. Still, after all the terrible things that happen, they tell them nothing. And this is one trick, and I want to get this out because this is such a simple hack that everybody needs to know how tricky and how awful, how illogical the U.S. tax code is. Let's talk about this Frenchman. Let's talk about this Frenchman who says he lives in France and he comes into the U.S. on an investor visa. Okay, he's going to invest in the U.S. Oh yeah, I want to. He invests $500,000 in some real estate development thing. Comes to the U.S. because his kids are going to college here. That's a common reason why people come to the U.S. because their kids are here. Oh, they might have kids, grandkids, and we want to be around them, right? So he comes here, and now he has assets back in France because that's how he came an investor visa. But now he is a U.S. person, and if he gets that green card because he's a U.S. person, this is what happens. This is utterly shocking. So let's say that he sells, maybe he has a chateau in France, right? And he sells that chateau, something that he inherited from his parents maybe just a couple years ago. Or maybe he got it way back when. And then he goes to sell it. Well, what's his tax bill going to be for the US? Well, get this. The basis in the property is not the value of the property the date that he became a US person. It's rather the value of the property of the data acquisition. That is, the IRS goes back in time to extend its jurisdiction to times when people are not even U.S. persons. So here is the simple hack and fix to that. Whenever you become a U.S. person and you have assets overseas, what you need to do is sell everything the day before, buy it back the day you become a U.S. person. Now your basis is going to be the fair market value of when you became a U.S. person, and then you won't have that terrible gain. And I've seen it, and it's just one of these awful things, and there is you're just unbelievable. That's one of the nasty surprises. And so I think the big key for people is before you become a U.S. person, and if you have assets and income, you absolutely need to talk to a tax professional before you do, because you will be surprised by things that are shocking to the conscious. And that's the truth.
You make a good point, Anthony, that somebody, the Frenchman, the Italian, or whatever, the Italian, they all know they got to get an immigration lawyer, to get into the country. But most of them probably don't even think about, why would I be subject to U.S. taxes? I'm just over here, visiting the kids and the grandkids, but I stayed a little too long. Yeah, that's
exactly. Exactly. There's no warning. And that we have our US bias of things, and we just think the world, well, we know how everything's done. But again, there's no other country in the world where this is done. So you could be a very astute businessman in all of Europe and know all the tax codes in Europe and not even be aware that there's something special about the IRS. And that's what just leads it down the road. Now, one thing too that I didn't mention yet, but this has been the huge. So I got in. I got in this 2009 is when I first got involved, and I started picking up other cases. Then in 2010, a new law was passed. It was part of the Hire Act of 2010, and this is a law that I've become an expert on far too much. And it's called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And what happened as the law was passed, it's just one of the most shocking. And this is, honestly, what I spend a lot of time on. One of the most shocking, abusive things you could possibly imagine. But what this does, what the Foreign Tax Compliance Act does, and here's a comment from Suzanne about it, is there's residency based or there's citizenship based taxation, and then what FATCA did is it forced through penalties and sanctions all foreign financial institutions to exercise due diligence to determine who account holders of them are U.S. persons. And then they're required to send letters to those people to say, hey, look, you're a U.S. person, and you need to disclose, that you're a U.S. person. Otherwise, we're going to shut off your account, and we may do it anyway. So what has happened is there's Americans overseas that lost their right to use bank accounts because of FATCA. And then what happened was, and what is currently happening, because FATCA is making life impossible for people overseas that is trying to have how do you live without a bank account? It makes it impossible. So many Americans, this is something that we do a lot of, we help people renounce. That's oftentimes the solution is renunciation, upgrading your life by getting rid of your terrible U.S. citizenship. So people who do move over, if you're, for a lot of people who are overseas, and when your financial center of gravity is no longer in the U.S., that's really a time where you got to think, look, this is never going to be good for you. It's probably going to be good to renounce. Just because, just give you an example, like somebody who you're doing a tax return for, who owns a local, a plumber with an LLC in the U.S. All right, how much are you going to talk? What's the most you're going to charge him for tax prep? Probably $1,500, $1,800, with an 1120S, a 1040, or maybe just a Schedule C. Same fact pattern, but let's put him in France. Okay, you might be charging him $5,000, and that might be a bargain, and that might be a total bargain, and you might be giving it away. The level of complication goes way, way up, and the consequences for getting it wrong go way, way up too. So you're in a situation, so you're in a situation, again, this, the U.S., your U.S. tax code obligations are non-delegable legal duty. While it's really nice that you can, hire a professional to do that, they make a mistake, you're still, the taxpayer's still on the hook. So this is where it just makes life completely miserable. So year after year after year, you're paying a massive amount of money just to prove that you don't actually owe money to the IRS. But if you don't do it, you could be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars of penalties and just a miserable life and try and do it. So these are kind of the things that we deal with. And it's really the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act has been the sort of the stick that has forced people to say, okay, I got to do something. Either because I lost my bank account, I either have to come into compliance or just find a way around this. And again, the United States of America, we're exceptional as well, because the fee to renounce is $2,350. Now, while it's supposed to be lowered to $400, it still hasn't been. It still hasn't.
This is your area, not mine, but I thought that the exit tax was you assumed that you sold everything to recognize all the gain and pay that, and then now you're free to go.
Well, you're bringing up another point. Great point, Larry. Great question. Okay, so the exit tax is actually something separate. Everybody who renounces has to pay the $2,350 fee to renounce, which is supposed to be lowered to $400. And we're waiting for that. We're still waiting. We have our network out there. So let us know when that actually happens, because it hasn't happened yet. The exit tax is a totally separate beast, and it is so ugly. It is so terrifying. And this is often the thing that will encourage someone to get out before they hit it. Where the exit tax comes into place is where your net worth gets over $2 million. And there's still a little bit of an exemption. So it's really when you're starting to get over $2.6 million, that's when the exit tax is going to apply. And what is supposed to, the exit tax, what the exit tax is supposed to do, because, the IRS looks at us as, hey, look, there's all a future estate tax that we all may be liable for, right? And they want that. They really want that. Now, if you're a U.S. person, the exemption right now is up to $12 million. It's not a big deal for many people. But they're like, well, you know what? That could come down. And they're licking their chops. They're like, well, we're going to lose a taxpayer, on their current taxes. We're going to lose a penalty bonanza. And well, we definitely don't want to lose that death tax we want to hit people with. So that's what the exit tax is going to be. But because it's foreign. Everything foreign that the IRS does is always more punitive. The reason why being is that there's no constituency for international and Congress. So Congress intentionally, every time they need more money, like, all right, well, we'll offset this spending by, throwing something horrible at US, with people of foreign income, because nobody has a sympathy for it. It's like, well, your income overseas, we don't care about that. We're about America, right? So this is what happens. So they're intentionally abused again and again and again. And this is the landscape that you're really in. So this is, again, why we encourage people to, if your financial center of gravity is not in the United States, you really want to leave. And if you're no longer in the United States, you really want to leave. If you are in the United States, then you got to make sure you're doing everything exactly right, the best that you can, because the IRS, and also take steps to make yourself not the audit target that they want, but not, ways to avoid audits so that they can't hit you with these penalties that they're on marching orders to get. And they love to report back to Congress, hey, look, with these few hours, we've gotten these amount of penalties. It's like, well, how much in tax? Oh, no, we didn't get any tax. We don't care about the tax, but we got the penalties, we got the press release. And that's really what they're really after. I mean, it's a terrifying landscape. That's really what I would say, is that if you think the IRS, regular resolution, dealing with a regular revenue officer is awful. Oh, it's far more worse to deal with international.
Let's talk about this. The IRS has to actually, because if you just move and you took your money and you move you move wherever, how active and how efficient, how effective is the IRS at collecting abroad?
Yeah. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. And Larry, you know this. Of course, you know this. But if you're, and here's one of the, if you're in the United States, there's the collection of the CSED, the collection statute expiration date. It runs, goes for 10 years.
Yeah.
You know that. Now, what happens? What's different when you owe money and you live overseas is that 10-year statute is supposed to toll. That is, the debt doesn't go away if you're overseas. That 10-year clock isn't running. However, the IRS doesn't even honor that, which is good.
I had a case out of Miami. I'm trying to remember some of the details, but the guy might have been from Colombia, and I'm trying to remember, but he swore, because if you look at the statute on that, it says if you're out of the country continuously for 6 days or more, or 6 months or more, continuously. And this guy swore, well, I always came back, see the wife or kids, whatever it was, for a week or two within 6 months. And we produced his passport that showed that. And the revenue officer said, well, no, he wanted to ignore the word continuously, and said, in any particular calendar year, you're gone for more than 6 months. I'm like, no, he was never gone continuously. And I wanted to fight that in court. But as you know, the biggest detriment to somebody getting their day in court is what? Lack of money to pay you to do it, So because I waited until we believed the statute had expired before bringing that up. Because as you know, not to step aside too much, before the 10 years is up, they can always sue you in federal court and get a judgment good for another 20 years. So we didn't want to bring this issue up to the revenue officer and have the IRS file a suit in court. So we waited till we thought it had expired, and then my client didn't have the money to fight it. So and I'll tell you another interesting story. I had this guy, an elderly couple. She was originally, I guess, a school teacher in England, and I don't know, they met here, and they were probably in their 70s, older. He did his own tax return in pencil. And somehow the IRS found out that he had $1 million in an account in Switzerland. And so it got investigated, and so we reported that kind of stuff. And I remember the investigator asked, does your client have any other bank accounts anywhere in the world? So I asked him, and he says no. And this is an example how clients, taxpayers frequently think they can lie because nobody will ever find out. Well, sure enough, the IRS comes back. Well, apparently your wife has an account in England, and that's where her pension check went into. And so the answer was, well, yeah, but that's just where he puts the pension. It's only a couple $100. I'm like, I don't care. I asked you, do you have any? I didn't qualify it, and now we look bad. So then we're trying to get them out of some penalties. I tried to use the argument that they're an elderly couple, they're not sophisticated, you know, and not, you know, no tax background. Well, hold on. So that's what was going to be my argument. Come to find out, so what's your educational background? Well, I've got a degree in mathematics from like NYU and then an MBA from Stanford. And I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, and then so that's a great point you bring up, because most of my clients, green card holders, investor visas, my clients overseas, these are the most highly functioning people in the world. And they're really a joy to have as a client. The things I've learned from them, just talking to them about their businesses and what they're up to, the perspective I get is wonderful. So this is often what happens, is that the way that we clean up nearly every problem that we have is with the streamlined disclosure problem, with the streamlined disclosure. Now, the Streamlined Disclosure program requires you to certify yourself as non-willful, that you didn't do this intentionally. So what happens is this, and this is really what I hear from people in other firms and my friends in other firms, is that these firms will say, well, this guy was smart. He should have known. Therefore, we can't do the streamlined for you. Or they'll say, well, you did one before. You should have known better. And I just think that that's, first of all, not what the law, this isn't even a law. These are just procedures by the IRS. So they're sort of wrong on there. And what they're looking at, and they won't accept the fact, their own bias of the tax code is they can't understand how utterly insane all of this is. How utterly insane all of it is, and that you will have disputes between two learned international tax attorneys about the proper treatment of some, both bringing up great arguments, and neither one really being able to decide. So I'm thinking, it's like, well, if that's the truth, then how could anyone really be willfully? Because it's so utterly complicated. So one of the things we've done is the cases no one else wants, we'll take, because I look at this and I say, you know what? You are non-willful. And really the thing is, the IRS wants these cases cleaned up. If you actually know how they work, they really want these cases cleaned up, because they don't have that staff to go after everybody. They would rather you just get into the system. And so that's one of the problems out there, is that, and this is what, and then this is what will happen, is a person will say, well, you did this willfully. And this highly intelligent person, it's like, yeah, I guess I should have known. Oh my God, you're right. Oh my God, I'm a criminal. And then the attorney will say, well, you know what you need to do? You need to enter into the Voluntary Disclosure program because you're criminal. And the problem with that is it is the worst program imaginable. It is wildly inappropriate for nearly everybody. It is incredibly expensive to do, because the IRS is going to be auditing 6 years, and then they'll be assessing a 50% penalty on your FBAR, as if they caught you. It's like your penalty amount is the same as if they caught you. So why would you volunteer? And then the answer, and the attorneys will say, because you're in a criminal investigation, you're going to go to jail. And these people aren't going to go to jail. That's not the thing, because what you mentioned before, because you said something very interesting. The last thing you ever want to argue to the IRS is that my clients are elderly and they didn't have the sophistication, because when the IRS hears this, and this is the truth, and I know this every which way, I've done this a million times and I've seen it a million times. When the IRS learns that your client is elderly and potentially has dementia, oh, that's when they lick their chops. That's when they lick their chops. If you look at all the litigation going on, it's elderly people. We've had elderly people with dementia. Oh, why didn't you file? Oh, I don't know. Kind of the dementia kind of had something to do with that. Well, you should have known. And then they come out crazy. And this is a coordinated response by the national coordinator. When you go to appeals, right? It's supposed to be an independent forum, right? This is what happens in appeals. Okay, I see your penalty abatement request. I had to send that off to the national FBAR coordinator. I'm like, well, why is that? well, we're trying to have a consistent basis of applying this law, consistently. I'm
Right.
like, well, that's the opposite of independence, bud. The opposite of it. And then, when I have a good, appeals officer on the line, it's like, yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. But this is the way we're doing it. So that's the key. There's so many key differences between how the IRS approaches these, and likewise. And here's the thing. And this is sort of the protection you need to do. What we try to do is, like, you have to appear like you have resources. If the IRS does something, you can fight back. That you will.
Okay.
You will fight back tooth and nail. You have to do that, because the same, and I know this for a fact. I absolutely know this for a fact. The same appeals officer that will hit your small individual client with a massive penalty, you could have the same missing form, but you're representing a closely held corporation that has assets. They'll say, well, how much more time do you need to get that form in?
Yeah.
I'm not going to penalize you, because you're going to fight back.
To your point on penalties, there's a lot of cases where, not in the foreign arena, in IRS, and we're talking about a $25,000 or $40,000, penalty, a reasonable cause, and I'm thinking of specific cases we had here in Tampa, and the IRS is, maybe they'll give you some, or maybe they don't give you anything at all, because they know you're not going to go to court over such a small dollar amount. Then I had another client, I won't give too many details, but he underreported his income 1 year by $54 million. Very wealthy individual. And they were right, they caught it. I personally think the guy kind of knew what he was doing, but so he wrote a check for 17 grand to pay the tax, and then there was a $3 million penalty. And so I tried to get out of it by reasonable cause, and the same appeals officer granted it to me. Because to your point, he may be thinking $3 million, we're going to go to court. And my client just wrote a check for 17 million. So he clearly has money to fight this.
Exactly.
So that's a good observation. It's like, they're not, they're going to roll over on the big ones when you've got the money to go to court to fight it.
And that is exactly how it works. That is exactly how it works. And so, and often, and oftentimes it's people, it's a horrible sale, I guess I have to make, to say, look, to do this right, it really does cost a bit of money to do it right. And in the faces of the people I see after when I give them, they're like, okay, let me use the quote for this. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to I'm like, it's going to be high. And I try to warn them. I'm like, you're not going to like this. It's going to be way out of proportion what you think it is. And I tell them what it is. Like, are you kidding me? Now, what will happen when the easier sales are when after they talk to, say, like a big white shoe tax firm, like a big firm in DC.
Firms, yeah.
Yeah. So after that, if they talk to them first and then come to me, they're like, oh yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, let's go going right now. And really, and then also the other problem too, is that, culturally, like the big four and these big tax firms, they can't figure out why you didn't pay your taxes. And so they're really, really suspicious of you. They're really not on your side. Yeah. They're just looking at you as here's some idiot who we're going to jack up, and we're just going to, whatever. They did something wrong and they deserve the punishment that they're going to get. Any empathy or human understanding is something that is so foreign to them. They're just so wrapped up in their little world that they think it's totally normal. Like, well, the tax code should destroy you. Well, I mean, you didn't do this, and no, it's a good thing that they're doing it. And they're really kind of on the government side in many cases. When I take over cases, I'm just appalled by what I see.
So, Anthony, we don't have a whole lot of time left. I want to talk about another topic that you've already mentioned a little bit. That's the FBAR reporting. And I'll tell you, I just had someone call me the other day, a small business owner, and they're in I didn't get a lot of details, some kind of tourism business in Florida. But the tourism work they do is in the Bahamas.
Okay.
And so I don't know if they take people down there, show them around, whatever. And I said, so do you have a business down there? Yeah. Do you have a bank account? And they said, yeah, we have a business bank account there. Okay. So they would be totally unsuspecting. And of course, she wanted to get off the phone because I told her I was going to charge for a consultation, which is, I think these people think that, I think they're poisoned by personal injury law firms that think that they can talk to lawyers as long as they want for free. And a lot of times people don't appreciate people like you and me with our education and 35, 40 years of experience, but anyway, so talk, if you will, about like what these people would have needed to know about FBAR, running a business in the Bahamas and having a bank account.
Okay, and by the way, the FBAR is something that was created in the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, and the claim was that law enforcement needed this to fight terrorism. So what they did in order to get around the prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures, they mandated that everybody with a foreign bank account over $10,000 in the aggregate, that is, if you had two bank accounts, both of $5,000, you have to report it FBAR, just to give you that example. And if you don't file it, you're subject to, if you unintentionally make a mistake, according to them, because they're the fact finders, then it's up to a $10,000 penalty. But if you did it intentionally, or they just think you're a good target, they're gonna assess you the 50%, up to 50% of account value. If it goes up of a certain amount, the willful penalty could be 50% of that account value. Now, this is some interesting things about that FBAR. The $10,000 threshold was set in 1970. I was born in 1971, so here I know 54 years later, what's the threshold at? $10,000. So this form assumes that your $10,000 bank account in today's dollars can support terrorism. So it's sort of an absurd thing. And so what it did is it mandated this form. So it only creates a penalty if you don't file. The only value that an FBAR has is when it's unfiled to the government. When it's filed, it has no value. But what they want is unfiled FBARs, because that allows them to throw incredibly punitive penalties at you. Now, the other thing on this too is if you actually look at the law, 31 USC 5314, if you actually look at the law and the definitions that precede it, you're going to find something very interesting, that the law actually doesn't authorize a report of foreign bank accounts. The law doesn't mention anything about a report of foreign bank accounts. What the law actually requires is you to report your foreign agency transactions. And if you actually look at the definitions, the Bank Secrecy Act defines a foreign agent as an individual, and then it specifically defines a foreign bank account as a foreign bank account. So that when you look at the law, it's, wait a second, guys, this isn't saying what you say it says. It's not actually the law. So I think, hopefully I'm trying to look for someone who wants to challenge this, that under, a West Virginia versus EPA analysis, there's no way, because what the government did is they took an authorization for one thing and they perverted it into the thing that it's not. And everyone's going along with it. And this power is so great, they're not about to give it up. They're not about to give it up. The Supreme Court has heard FBAR cases, and they don't want to look at this because it removes, this terrorism created by the FBAR. So it's just one of these incredible injustices that goes on, and it's going on, right? Just look at the law, 31 5314. Tell me where it says report of foreign bank accounts. It does not. And then when you go to the regulation, now the regulations say so, and the regulations will say, pursuant to, as mandated by 5314, where this is the FBAR. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. So again, this is just sort of the entire additional injustice, that when you have the judicial fraud of the FBAR, which is really what it is, because the law doesn't authorize that, but the penalty bonanza is far too great for the U.S. government to actually be honest about what it is.
So Anthony, tell me now, if somebody listening to this, or they know someone and they've had a bank account abroad and they didn't report them, I believe they've had some amnesty in the past. Is there an amnesty now to get out of this? What's the current climate?
Yeah. So, and here's a great question. Here's a great comment here. And I totally get it. And I apologize for everyone for this. This is great information, but man, is it stressful to listen to you. Oh boy, I am sorry. And let me give you some relief here. So here's all the things that are going wrong, but this is what I could tell you. We have submitted thousands of streamlined disclosures. We have done ones that other firms wouldn't do. We have done ones that have been pushes. Every single one of ours has been accepted. Not one of them has ever been audited. So that is the one benefit. If you do it right, you can get relief. Now, for some of our clients, and then if you have a good tax team, can stay in compliance. It just comes down to this: just accepting you're going to have a more complicated tax return that's going to be more expensive. As long as you have with that understanding, you have a good firm, you'll be fine. You will be fine. It's just that you cannot expect to have the same treatment domestically. The same sort of things you can get away with domestically, you simply can't. You have to be on top of it. And it's something that we've done for clients, for 15 years, never had a problem. And we don't expect the problems. And that's the benefit of having a strong firm. I'm known by the IRS. We've done some aggressive work that we've backed up, and we'll go toe to toe, and I won't back off. And I will put a lot of work on their plate, and I'll do it honestly and ethically, but I will put a lot of work on their plate where they'll say, we need to get rid of this guy. He's driving us nuts. And that's kind of what you're trying to get to. So that's what I would say. It's like this, the reality is you really need the top level expertise on this. You need to be aware that it's going to be a cost, but you can find peace. And if you are thinking of renouncing, do the Streamlined program. And I don't care if someone told you don't qualify, talk to me first. I'll let you know if you qualify.
You said
the Streamlined program. Yeah, the Streamlined program is pretty good.
So just ballpark, not to hold you to it, but what kind of fees are you talking about versus if you don't qualify, what kind of penalties, if you don't do this? Someone says, you know what, Anthony, I can't afford whatever. Let's say your fees are 25 grand. I have no idea. I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep my bank accounts, or I'm going to close those accounts and bring them ashore and hope I never get found out. What are the consequences of not doing this?
Well, a lot of it's difficult. And this is what I like to say to people. There's some people who I know are not, tax non-compliance. And I'm not in a position where I'm going to tell them that they need to do it because there's other things that happen. And a lot of people around the world go away with it. I know that like the expat community in Thailand. Oh yeah, there's a lot there. And I'm like, okay, do what you guys want to do. There's a lot of pockets of places where there's an incredible amount, and it's just sort of part of the culture of the expat community there not to comply. And so there's a lot of people who aren't, and they're getting away with it. The issue is this: the issue that we always find is when you're going to get an inheritance in the U.S. There's some financial tie to the U.S. That's really where they have you. Now, to give you an idea of the fees, and this is a perfect example. I had one client who found out about, oh my God, I'm not in tax compliance. He went to the firm in Washington, D.C. He had about $11 million unreported. He was trading in precious metals. And they said, okay, it's going to cost us $1 million to represent you. And the end result is you losing your entire fortune. So he came to me, and this was a case, I think his fee ended up being he had multiple entities, by the way. That's really the driver of cost. He had multiple entities. Our fee was $350,000. That was a little bit high for us. But he said, great, let's get going right now. And then instead of losing his $350,000. There was a lot to do. Yeah, no, it gets complicated. That was the nature of it. It was a complicated thing, and he had a push. So it took a little bit more on my half to get it done. But we did get it in, and instead of losing his fortune, his tax bill was only $1.1 million. So not only did we charge him massively less, but he was actually able to hang on his fortune. Now I would say that was an exceptional case. So most of the time where our fees are going to be around $25,000 for the typical disclosure. The more entities you have, the more other U.S. persons you have, it goes up. But again, now if this client of mine went through what the other attorney wanted to do, he would have lost his fortune. And if he was detected, he would have lost his entire fortune. And he didn't, he was really upset about this because I really didn't know. And he was in a situation where he opened a Swiss bank account. They assumed he was doing it to evade taxes. Right. So they were like, yeah. So like yeah. So they didn't tell him. And it's like, wait. And so they had an off the shelf entity that they hopped into, like, oh yeah, here you go. Wink, wink, wink. He's not understanding why they're winking, So he's like, oh my God, now I know why they didn't tell me. Because they thought I was looking to evade taxes. Like, no, I would pay whatever. That's not my style. I don't want to do that. And that's actually something I find a lot of. Most of my clients had no intention of actually doing, whatever it was. They're shocked, surprised to find out I didn't pay my taxes. I didn't do this. You got to be kidding me. I'm a criminal. Oh my God, I'm going to go to jail. And I back them off like, no. It's really, and this is what I often tell people, back to the point and how stressful it is. What the IRS doesn't want to do, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, what they don't want is a loss. They only want slam dunk cases.
That's right.
So when you come and, when someone has income overseas and a connection overseas, the jury themselves, they're going to be looking at each other. Wait, we have to pay taxes on that? I didn't know that. So it's not the case that they want to bring. That's not the case at all they want to bring. If someone's in the US and then sends money to Switzerland, okay, that's more or less a case they would want to bring. But if somebody has a reason for having their accounts overseas, like, well, I was born in a different country and I made a bunch of money there, and then moves around, that's not the case they want. That's way like, oh no, a jury's not going to understand that. A jury would be shocked and appalled to learn that. So those aren't the cases they want to bring. They're just really the threat that most people have by far, not criminal charges. And there's incredibly few indictments now. The most people have is just ruinous penalties that the IRS and Department of Justice will sue you for, go after in the most harshest way. That's really the threat people have.
Well, this has been great. And I've learned some things. We're getting towards the end of our allotted time. Or is there anything else you want to cover before we close out?
Larry, I thank you so much for this. I've been able to kind of tee off on a lot of things that really, really bug me about, the thing, but ultimately,
you're definitely passionate about it. I can hear that.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's all things that can be dealt with. And hopefully I think I conveyed how scary it is and how high the consequences are. And there's always solutions to it, but you got to do it the right way. And be careful of the tax industry because they will scare you into something that's not true. If it just sounds unbelievable, here, I'll give you, I'll show people where they can reach out, get going to me, get going. Just go to irsmedic.com/offshore. That's a place there. You get, book a call. We'll figure out what's going on. We'll give you the real advice too about what you actually have to do. And anything you tell me is protected by the attorney-client privilege. I'm not going to go and look, I've talked to people. Yeah, right. That's the thing. Right. And the CPA doesn't apply. Now, if you talk to one of my CPAs, yes, it does apply. But if you just go to a tax firm, right, they work for me. But if you just go to a regular tax firm, and that's not protected. So anything they say, that's not a good idea to do that. You really want to talk to a tax attorney. So go to irsmedic.com offshore, or you could text offshore to 818-293-4857, and we can get going on that, give you the real advice, really help you get through this. And it's an emotional thing, and we understand that. I mean, this is an incredibly emotional thing, and I think that's the part of it that I actually enjoy, is helping people work through the terrible emotions that they're experiencing through this process, and getting them cleaned up on the other end where they can finally breathe easy. That's really the part I enjoy. And then following up my clients, seeing how everything's going. It's really a position of honor that I am, and I truly love it. So that's what I finished with there.
Well, good. Well, this has been great. You've probably got some remarks. It's your podcast, so I turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Larry. And by the way, I want to thank Larry. We got some great comments last week. We did a podcast, and I'm going to try to push Larry on this because he's just brilliant. And I think he's an awesome presenter who really understand things at a deep level. And he truly wants to help people. So what I'm hoping that we could do is actually develop a CLE series so we educate other tax professionals on these issues. Larry is just absolutely, I gotta plug this because this is a wonderful, wonderful thing that he does. He has tax discharge determinator, what many people don't know in tax resolution. And I see this like on TikTok and everywhere, where people will tell you the solutions to solve a tax problem. Well, these are non-attorneys. These people are not attorneys. All they know is what the IRS tells them. Larry knows this, that bankruptcy often can be an incredible tool to solve really, really nagging problems. And it's not as bad as people think. People have smiles. Once you understand what it is, it actually could be a wonderful thing. So it is something. If you have a client who has a tax problem, it doesn't seem like you could solve, bankruptcy might be there. You can go to Tax Discharge Determinator, determine if your client can discharge your tax debts. And if you do have a really, really awful, nasty, big tax problem, I got to say, Larry is absolutely one of the finest in the country. I can't recommend him enough. Go to taxproblemsolver.com. He's really, really a true honor. It's an honor to have him on here. So that's what I want to leave you on. I want to leave everybody with that. Again, if you do have an international tax issue, reach out to me at IRS Minute events, and we're getting great comments. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, turn on those notifications so we you know when we go live. We might go live at any time. Pockets of time we find, so it might be any time. So be sure to subscribe. And again, turn on some notifications so you won't miss a thing. So with that, I want to thank Larry Heinkel so much for interviewing me today. And I want to thank you all for being here. And again, thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.